Hello everybody and welcome back to our channel. Here we share beginner-friendly coding tutorials on Scratch, Minecraft, Roblox, web programming, and many more. Today we're going to create a micro-bit game called Crashy Bird. In this game called the Crashy Bird, we make something similar to Flappy Bird. Here, the goal of the game is to use microbits controls and to go through the openings of each wall. So as you see, the walls are coming in and our objective is to not hit the wall. So let's get to microbits and get started. So for today's project, I'll be working on a template. And this template is also included in the description below, so you guys can click on it and follow along. Before we get started, I have declared 8 variables. So if I go over here to variables, you guys can see that I have 8 different variables I have made. And to make a variable, we go on here to make a variable. And whatever name we type here and click OK, and we'll actually make a new variable here. So you guys can take a pause at the video and make these 8 variables before you get started. After you have done so, the first thing we can do is to work on our onStart block. And if your onStart is not in here, simply go to basic and onStart will be right here and we can drag it into the game. Next, we should set our variables for bird. So here, I'm gonna go down to variables, set tick to 0, and I'm gonna drag it in here. And to change this variable from tick to bird, I click on this upside down arrow, which will allow a drop down menu selecting bird as our variable. Now, let's change the value here. And to find the block we need, we're gonna go back to our taskbar and click on advanced. This will bring a lot more options for us. And we're gonna click on game. In game, we want to drag the create sprite at X and Y and drop it where the 0 used to be. And here I'm gonna put an X of 0 and keep the Y at 2. And for the last block in the start, we're gonna go once again back to game. And I'm gonna grab the sprite set X to, drag it in here. And I'm gonna change the sprite so that it says bird. And also from X, I'm gonna change it to blank. And for the value, I'll change it to 300. So now as you can see on the left side of our preview, we have our bird, which is blinking at this 300 rates, and it is as X0 and Y of 2. So now let's do the movement for our bird. So when we press the A button, we want the bird to go up. And when we press the B button, we want the bird to go down. So here, I'm gonna go to game. And here, I'm gonna go to input. And I'm gonna grab the on button A pressed. And like we said, we want the bird to go up when the A button is clicked. To move the bird, we should go to game. And we should drag the change X by and drag in here. And now we should change the sprite to bird. Instead of changing the X value, we'll be changing the Y value. So we should drag it down, click Y. And here we can say change Y by 1. So now when we press A, it will go up. And now let's change this value to -1 so that when we press A, it will go up. So here, when I press A over here in the preview, our bird has gone 1 block up. And now let's do it the same for the B button. So let's go to inputs. And here I can use the on button A dot pressed. And let me change from A to B. And again, I'm gonna go into game, sprite change X. And now I will change the sprite so it says bird. Instead of changing X, I'm gonna be changing the Y. And we're gonna change Y by 1. And here, now we can see that when the B button is pressed, our bird goes 1 block down. And when the A button is pressed, we go one block up. So now we have the blocks for a bird to move. It's time to do our obstacles. Here, again, we want to grab the on start button. So we're going to go to basic, on start. And here, I'm going to grab the variable and the set variable and drag in here. And now I'll be changing sprite into our obstacles y, or empty obstacle y. And for the value, I'm actually going to use a random number between 1 to 4. So here we can go to math, and we can grab the pick random, drag it inside the box, and here I'll have 0 to 4. So now let's start with the actual obstacle. Here we shall initialize our obstacle array and our index inside of onStarts. So we're going to go over to variables, set variables, and I'm going to drag it up here. And instead of sprites, I'm going to change it to obstacle. And here I'm going to have an empty array. So I'm going to go down under advanced to array. And I'm going to go to under create, we have empty array. And one more last thing before we leave is that we should set the index to 0. So here we're going to grab the set, and we're going to set the variable named index to 0. Now that we have initialized our variables on starts, we can start programming our obstacle. So in the forever loop, we shall add a couple of code. First thing we should do is to check when we should delete the walls and obstacles, and we should do it when it has reached the end where x is equal to 0. So let's start by grabbing a loop, and here we're going to use a while loop. So we shall go to loops, a while loop, and drag into our forever. Inside the forever loop, inside the while loop, we should check for 2 conditions. The first condition is that there's still obstacles in our obstacle array. The second should be checking their location. So to check for 2 things at once, we should go to logic. And here we can use the AND Boolean tag. So under Boolean, we use the AND, and we drag it to where the true was. So now we can have 2 conditions. And the only way this will be true is if both conditions are true. So now we shall find the length of the array. And here we can go to variable. And here we can go to arrays, the length of array. And here we shall change the array name to obstacle. And we have to compare this length of array to something. So let's grab another logic. And here I'm going to grab the equality sign under comparison and drag it as our first condition. And I'm going to drag it. So I'm going to go to logic, comparison, and drag this into our first box. And I'm going to drag the length of array as our first value for this Boolean. And here, we're just going to change equals to greater than. So while this array size is greater than 0, and the value of their x value is 0, then we can start removing the stuff in our obstacle array. So the second condition should be checking rather the position at x is 0. So here we go to array, and we can use get value at. And here I'll put this in here for now. And again, we have to compare this to some other value. So we should go to logic, comparison, and grab the comparison block into our second argument for the end. And here we can put the list as the first argument. let's change the list to the list we have, which is obstacle. And now we should change this value. So now let's do our second condition for our while loop. So here I'm gonna go to logic. I'm gonna grab another comparison. And for the first comparison, we're gonna be using the X value inside of our array obstacle. So here I'm gonna go to game. And I'm gonna drag the sprite at X. And here, instead of using sprite, we're actually gonna be using the values in our array. So we're gonna go over to array, list get value at, and we're gonna replace that with our sprite. So here we can delete this. And now we can drag this whole block into our first thing. And here we should change the list to obstacle. So while this whole statement is true, we want to be deleting our obstacle element. So to do that, we go to game and we can use this delete block. And we're going to drag it into the while do loop. And here we're going to be using the values from our array to delete the elements inside. So here we can click on array and we can use the list get and remove value at, and we can drag it in and replace our sprite. Again, we can delete this. And once again, let's change this so that it says obstacle. So this while loop will make sure that by the time the while reaches the end, it will be deleted. So now let's add the code so that it will start shifting to the left as soon as it is created. So here, we're going to have another loop, but this time it's going to be a for loop. So we're going to use the for element value of list do, and I'm going to drag it right underneath our while loop. Here, we should change the value in the list. So the list we should change to obstacle. And for values, we can use our second variable for obstacle called obstacle2, and we can drag it in there. Now we should change the obstacle2's position of X by -1, so it shifts to the left. So here we can go to game, sprite change X by, and instead of sprites, we're going to change it to obstacle2. And we're going to change X by -1. So now that we have the code to remove the obstacles, let's do the code for creating the obstacles. So here, we should go to variables and use the set variable down here. And here, we're going to set our variable named empty obstacle y. And the value we're going to set it to is going to be a random number between 0 and 4. So here, we can go down to math, pick random, and we're going to pick random from 0 to 4. And now we should use our variable that we set in start index to go through our whole array of obstacles. So we're going to use a for loop for this. So let's go to loops, a for loop. And this has already been using index, but if it isn't, we can go to variable, drag index into here. So we want them to start from 0 to 4, which is what it starts with as default, so we don't have to change that. Inside the for loop, we want to check the index is equal to our empty obstacle y. And if it is, we simply add a value to it. If it's not, we do nothing. So to check for that, we use a logic if. So let's grab the if true then and put it inside of our for loop. The condition we're checking for is rather index is equals to empty obstacle y. So let's grab another logic and grab the boolean for equals. And here I need an actual comparison. Oh, and here I can just drag this right into here. And the first value should be index. So let's go to variable, index, and drag it into our first block. And the second should be our empty obstacle y. So let's again go to variables, empty obstacle y, and put it in here. And now I'm going to use another array function. And the one we're going to use is add value to the end. So here we can use this list add value to the end and change list to our obstacle. And the value we're going to be adding is creating a sprite at that location. So here we can go to game, create sprite. And here we should change x to 4, so it starts out all the way to the right. And for y, we should use the index. So here we're going to go to variables, index, and drag it into the end like that. And finally, we should add a pause here so that there's a pause, so that as you can see on the preview, there's add the delay between each obstacles. And to add the delay, we go to basic, go down to pause. And here, since this is in milliseconds, I'm gonna make it 1 second. So 1000 milliseconds. And that will create the wall obstacles for us. So if you look at the preview, you can see that at each time we're only making one bit. And that is because in our for loop, we set that if index is equal to the empty obstacle y, then we make a sprite there. But the point is that we should have the empty obstacle y be the one space where our bird can fly through. So instead of a equal sign, we should change this into a not equal sign. And now what this will do is it will add a space where index is equal to obstacle y. And then everywhere else will have no space. So now you can see on the picture, there's only one hole between the walls, which is exactly what we wanted. So even with the delay, if you look at the inputs, we can see that at each forever loop, we are creating an obstacles, but that will be quite hard for the user to beat. So instead, we should space out the obstacles so that every 3 forever loops, we create our obstacles. And to count how many times we have gone through the forever loop, we use a variable that we declared already, known as text. And text will just count how many times we've iterated through this forever loop. So here, let's grab an if condition. And here I'm going to do a little bit of refactoring. I'm going to grab everything below set empty obstacle y and the for loop inside of our array, leaving pause out here. And I'm going to drag this back inside. So for the if condition, let's change it so that it says the remainder divided by tech is equal to 3. Then we can go and make this obstacle. And another way to do this is simply dividing it by 3 and see if the remainder equals to 0. Because if the remainder equals to 0, that means we are in the multiple of 3. And then therefore we create our wall. So here, let's go to math. And we're going to grab the remainder of. And before I do this, I should use the equality symbol as well. So let's go to logic. And let's go to the comparison and plug it in into our if condition. And now we can grab the remainder function and put it as our first condition. And here, we should replace the first variable to text. So here I'm going to put text divided by 3. And if it's equal to 0, then we do this generation of the obstacle wall. Otherwise, we don't do anything. Since we're using tick as a counter, we have to initialize the value. And while we add it, let's also initialize our obstacle array to an empty array. So let's go back to at start. So on start, we want to set our variable tick to 0. So let's go to set value, change the ticks, and we set to 0. Next, we want to set our obstacle to an empty array. So here we're going to go to set, again, under variables, set obstacle. And to make an array, we should go to advanced array and drag the empty array. And that will initialize our obstacle to an empty array and our text to 0. So now let's go back to our forever loop. Here, after each iterations, we want to increase tick by 1. So we can go down to variables, change value by 1, and right above the pause and outside of the if loop, we change ticks by 1. The final step in the game is to check if the obstacles has hit our bird. In that case, we should signal game over and have the user restart. So underneath this if loop, we're going to add more code. Here, we're going to use a for loop to go through the elements in our obstacle array to check if it's the same location as our bird. So here, I should go to loops. And again, I'm going to use the for elements. Here, I'm going to use the obstacle 3 variables that we have declared. And the list is going to be the same as obstacle. And here I'm going to be checking whether the obstacle 3's location is the same as our bird. And to check stuff, we use the logic conditionals. So I'm going to grab the if statements. Here, we're trying to check if the x value of obstacle 3 equals the x value of bird. And we check the y value of obstacle 3 and see if it matches with the obstacle, to see if it matches with the y of the bird. So here in the condition, we check if the x and y coordinates of obstacle 3 is equal to our bird's x and y values. If the x and y value both matches, that means it is at the same location, and therefore we have lost the game. Here, I'm going to go to logic, and I'm going to grab the Boolean and put it in our condition. So the first condition should check for the x values. So here, I'm going to go down to logic and grab the comparison equality block. On the left, I want to check the y value of our obstacle 3. So let's go to game. Here we have sprite x. Replace sprite with obstacle 3. Again, I'm going to drag sprite x again as our second equality. This time I should change sprite to bird. Again, on the right side of this end loop, we're going to use something similar. I'm going to grab logic, another comparison. And again, I'm going to go to game, sprite. Now I'm going to change sprite to obstacle 3, as well as just change the x to y. And here I'm going to once again grab game sprite x, change sprite to bird, and change x to y. And to indicate that the game has ended, we go to game. We go down until it says game over. And then we put it in here. And this will conclude the game if it hits the bird. And this right here is the whole code for this game. So now, as you can see in our game, we can press the start button. And it will start and the walls would be generated. And then we can press the A or the B button to move our bird. And yeah, so this is the whole game. So that's all for today. In today's tutorial, we create a game that is similar to Flappy Bird. We made use of variables, conditionals, and logic gates. We press the A and B button to control our bird, and then our main goal is to avoid the obstacles. If it hit the obstacles, the bird will blink and the game is over. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to check out the next section in this project. And don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you. Bye bye.